A house in Toronto just sold for 175% of the asking price. In the Hillcrest Village community of Toronto, a semi-detached home sold for just under $1.4 million. That's not the big news. Homes in Toronto go for these prices on a regular basis. What's catching my attention for this one is that the list price was just under $800,000. This is 100% misleading to anyone looking at the listing. There was no way this house was going to sell for anywhere close to the $800,000. And sure enough, it didn't. It sold for 75% more than the asking price. And if you thought that maybe this house was listed way below its market value, then you guessed right. I mean, I get that houses are listed below market value to attract attention. This is very common, but it's misleading because it sets a false expectation for buyers out there. And as a buyer, you might think that you actually have a chance of buying this home, maybe even for somewhere close to $1 million, since you already understand that sometimes a seller's expectations are just slightly above the asking price. But nope, not in this case. In fact, it probably created more work on the sales side too. I'm not sure how many offers this property ended up receiving, but there were likely several that came in way below the seller's expectations. Just an example of how this practice ends up wasting a lot of time on both ends if the property isn't priced correctly. Have you heard of the anchoring effect? When you're negotiating, the first price the listing comes out at sets the anchor, and that anchor is your baseline where negotiations fluctuate up and down from. For this listing, the price of $800,000 becomes the anchor. Everything that happens during negotiations happens around this price. Anything below that anchor would most likely be of no interest to the seller, since they're probably looking for more than the asking price, especially when we know that there's an offer date. But how much more? You wouldn't know the ballpark answer to this question unless you're familiar with the area and what sold recently. So instead, you don't go too high. Yet for this particular property, the anchor was set so low that it actually made no sense. In the case of an offer price coming in from a potential purchaser, the initial offer can also set another anchor. A purchaser is going to go in with a price that isn't going to be as high as what they can actually afford, which makes sense for a few reasons. The buyer wants to save money, and by going in with all of their money on the first offer won't do them any good. You don't know what the seller is willing to accept, so going in lower means you have a chance to save money if your offer is accepted. You also don't know if you'll end up in a multiple offer situation, so it's best to keep some cash aside from the offer in case you need to bump up your price, especially if the property is the one. But go in with a price that's too low, and that could have a negative impact on your offer and maybe your chances entirely. A low price could actually in some cases tell the seller that you're not that serious, and they have the option to not provide you with a second opportunity to go in with a higher price. So make sure you really understand what price makes sense before making an offer. Wouldn't it be so ridiculous if you saw the property listed for $800,000, made the offer for $1 million, which is $200,000 or 25% over the list price, which on paper sounds like it should be enough, only to find out that $200,000 more than the asking price isn't enough, and to list the property at almost twice below what the house is actually worth? Questionable strategy, but I guess it worked in the end. This is now the highest sold semi in the Don Mills and Finch area of Toronto. Fun fact, and comment below if you're familiar with Peanut Plaza in the area. That plaza is one of the spots I grew up going to for a few years, and even the beef patty shop is still there to this day. I still go and get the patty cocoa bread with a pineapple soda drink, one of the best meals you can get for $5.25. And that's tax in. And by the way, I'm Fred Tam, thanks for checking out my video. If you're new here and you're gaining value, consider subscribing to the channel. New videos are coming out every single week to help you reach your real estate goals. Now let's get back to it. The previous record for the highest selling semi-detached home in the area was held by one that sold in 2022 for $1.3 million. 2 years ago, the market was on its way down. Interest rates were rising and home prices were falling. Today, the Bank of Canada has been holding the overnight interest rate at 5% since July last year. The overnight interest rate is what the banks use to decide what mortgage rates are going to be, and the higher the overnight rate is, the more expensive it is for consumers to borrow money for things like mortgages. And now almost 1 year later, home prices in some cases are now exceeding what they were pre-interest rate hike, which kind of makes you wonder how much of an impact higher interest rates have on the Toronto real estate market. Maybe none, especially in the long run. There's a good reason for that though, and I think it has to do with how resilient the Toronto real estate market is. I don't think the dream of buying a home in Toronto is out of reach. If that were true, then there wouldn't be people buying property with transactions happening every single day. In fact, there were just over 6,500 sales transactions last month, according to the Toronto Real Estate Board's Market Watch report. In retrospect, that's only 4.5% less compared to March last year, and yet it's still more than February when there were only 5,600 sales transactions and January only had 4,200. So the trend is going up, people are moving. Let's get back to that semi at Don Mills and Finch. In 2022, single-family attached homes in this area were going for an average price of $1.2 million. Today, they're going for an average just around $1.09 million. So in 2 years, property values have gone up and down, but overall, they haven't changed much. And this makes sense since buyers are starting to get used to the high interest rate environment. Scratch that. They're already used to the current interest rates. They're relatively high compared to when people were getting mortgage rates of 2% back in the day. Those days are gone and need to be forgotten about because they're not coming back. A lot of people in the market right now have already adapted to the changes in interest rates. And in the past, people were accustomed to borrowing money from the bank for mortgages practically for free when interest rates were so low for such a long time. And if you compare today's borrowing rates to those of the previous 20 or 30 years, they're actually normal. People are beginning to understand and adapt to the fact that low interest percentages that we had in the past were in the past, and our current interest rates are the new normal in today's economy. And this is the reason why there's almost no point in waiting for home prices to drop anymore. We went through that part of the real estate and economic cycle and prices came down, but that's no longer the case. Waiting for the market to cool down and delaying the surge can only last so long before it's time to make a move. There is a chance for rates to go up again, even though they're poised to come down based on most economic reports, including what the Bank of Canada is saying. Another rate hike could drop home prices even further. But again, the chances of the overnight rate going up is slim. And if home prices do come down, how long does that window of opportunity last? In the Toronto and GTA property market, it doesn't last long, which is why I always say that timing the market is a waste of effort. The Toronto Real Estate Board's latest Market Watch report shows that the average selling price exactly 1 year ago was $1,107,000. And now today that's already gone up to $1,121,000, an increase of 1.3% year over year. So for a semi-detached home in North York to sell for $1.3 million sounds a little bit extreme. It's not a detached house. If the same exact house was located further east in Toronto, it would have sold for less than $1 million. A detached property in the east part of Toronto would go for less than 1.3 million, probably closer to 1.2. And this is just one example of why the area makes a difference in home prices. If you're flexible with where you're willing to move to, then you're putting yourself at an advantage and can potentially save some money. There's a semi-detached house in the Greenwood community of Toronto along Danforth. Right now it's listed for $749,000. It's a 1-bedroom house with 1 bathroom. There's an extra bedroom in the basement. There's no parking on the property, but I guess if you're living in the area, then the parking situation isn't a deal breaker for some people. You've got the TTC that's extremely reliable every single day of the week, and options for rideshare programs if you need to get around, or do that thing that people don't really do much of anymore, you know, that thing called walking. Everything's walking distance. In fact, it's pretty common to see houses in this area with no parking available on their property. But let's jump back to the price. $749,000. That's cheaper than a 2-bedroom condo in North York, which on average go for around $850,000. Here's some other benefits of buying this house, because believe it or not, the low price isn't the only good thing. It's a freehold property. It's not a condo. You don't pay any maintenance fees. Maintenance fees go up every single year by about 3 to 5%. This property also has a backyard. It's hard enough as it is to find a freehold townhouse in Toronto that has a backyard for less than $1 million. At this price point, you're barely finding a condo townhouse for the same price. Property taxes are about $2,700. The average property taxes of 2-bedroom condos in Toronto that sold in just the last day is $3,500. The square footage is probably lower than 1,000 square feet plus finished basement, yet this is still more than what you'd get in a 2-bedroom condo that would probably have a maintenance fee in the $700 or $800 range, maybe even more. And because this house has a smaller footprint, utilities are probably going to cost less too, including heating up the house. So at the end of the day, freehold ownership is known to be a difficult achievement to get in Toronto, but this house has so many benefits that would probably make people think twice before looking at other properties. I think a lot of buyers out there think about condos as maybe their only option, but again, if you're flexible with the location, then consider your options and maybe you'll buy yourself a freehold property instead of a condo that's potentially overpriced. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to watch new videos every single week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.